Hey everyone, welcome back to the Aikman Bros podcast. I'm James and my brother, Andrew. So today we're going to start with kind of going over a few more questions that we've gotten from you guys. First one, what's the biggest misconception at Aikman Wildlife? And kind of in talking with people over the years, my top three has always been one, people pull into our parking lot and they see the drive-through next to it and they think that is our drive-through. So why would I pay money to drive through when I can see it from the parking lot? So they don't realize that our drive-through actually horseshoes the entire property. So what you see from the parking lot is only a fraction of the drive-through. Another one is we have a walk-through and a drive-through. Why would I walk to see the animals when I can drive? So the walk-through side has a completely different set of animals than the drive-through side. And the one that kind of always makes me laugh is I get people saying, hey, we've been wanting to come out to your park. We're just waiting for you to get more animals. And I tell them, well, we've got over 200 animals here, over 75 different species. We're not really actively seeking new animals. And usually their eyes get real big, their jaw drops. They have no idea that we have that many animals out here. I don't know if you have.
I guess one of mine is just, I don't know if it's a misconception, but kind of constantly being amazed by what people think is the right thing to do when they're in a zoo type of setting. So, there's a reason why we have barriers around certain fences and that sort of thing, and it's to prevent as many things as possible from happening from the public standpoint. So people think that if there's an animal they want to get a better look at, then they can just easily put their child over a fence or something like that to get a little closer look at it, and it's just it's not a good practice by any means. So it's kind of people thinking that they can do whatever they want to do once they actually pay to get in, and that's just not the case at all. There are, not only are we looking out for them, obviously, but we're also looking out for our animals. So a lot of these animals, depending on what their background is, they can be spooked really easily, startled really easily. So kind of misconception from a people's standpoint is just once they get into the property, they think they have free reign, and that's not necessarily the case.
I think one we do get often also is people think that the park is just for kids, whereas in reality, I've done behind the scene tours for couples in their late 80s and 90s before, and they absolutely love it. Time of their life, they want to schedule it. They come back every year to do it. So the park is not just for kids. So
yeah, it's not only that, but we've done more and more group tours where it's an older crowd. So whether it's a retirement home or assisted living home, and when they go out in the wagon and experience a wagon ride, you can kind of just tell that they are instantly kind of transformed back to younger time in their lives where they're a little more energetic, big smiles on their faces. So the same reaction that a field trip with a bunch of third graders, we've had the same thing with a group tour that has 80-year-old, 90-year-olds in it. So it's kind of the nice thing about animals in general is that it kind of reaches all age groups. Kind of age has no limit when it comes to just kind of admiring animals. And
so we've had some of those group tours, they get done, they get off the wagon, and they say that's the coolest thing they ever did.
Yeah.
Most fun they've ever had in a long time.
Yep.
So definitely, if you don't have kids, do not let that stop you from coming out and enjoying the park, because lots of other people do and don't regret it.
Yep.
But I would say those are definitely the main misconceptions for the most part. So we've talked a little bit about new animals in the past. We are working on bringing kangaroos back to the park. I would love to have alligators. Yeah, so that we already have kangaroos at the park. They're just not open to the public yet. So our goal is next spring or summer being able to open them back up and re-offer kangaroo encounters. But like I would love to have an alligator too at the park. Andy cringes every time I say I would love to have an animal.
Large reptiles in Illinois weather doesn't necessarily go hand in hand.
So we'd have to.
In order to have an alligator, we'd have to make sure we have the proper winter holding facilities.
Yeah, so it's a spot in our barn that we keep heated with a concrete pool in it with a drain.
Potentially.
And we'd be set. So more to come on the alligator.
It'll probably be one of those things that he will just tell me one day, hey, an alligator's coming, and this is what we have to do. So
I've learned the saying, ask for forgiveness and not permission is way easier. So that's what I usually do with Andy. So,
well, that's what I usually do with budgets too. So it'll be all right.
So sometimes it's not until the day of.
Yeah.
Or the night of. So we just had an animal come in the other night. Arrived at 11:30. Thought it was just an addicts, and then it ended up there was a ram on there. I thought we might be getting, but never had confirmation until they pulled into the parking lot at 11:30 that night. And so we go to back it up in the alleyway. Door opens. His response was, "Whose ram is that?" And so
usually how it is.
I told him, well, that's ours, and he handled it surprisingly well at the time. And then once we got the animals unloaded and parted ways, he chewed me out for about 20 minutes. So about 12:30 to 1 o'clock that morning.
A little heads up would have been nice.
I told him with that one, I did just find that out literally once they arrived there. So I figured it would stress him out too much to tell him that before it was in place. But something else that I've wanted at the park for a long time is a budgie aviary. So budgies are kind of like parakeets. You can get feed sticks. You go in, the birds land on you. They eat the food off the feed sticks. I know I've taken my kids to do that at other zoos, and some of my kids, they had more fun with that even than giraffe feeding. And so Andy's not a huge bird fan, but I think...
Well, with that situation, again, it comes down to just proper facility to make sure that it's as efficient as possible from a carrying standpoint. So yeah. It's been brought up multiple times throughout the years. So we'll just see if I can continue to push it down on the to-do list.
2022 is the year.
Potentially.
Like I would love to have more African antelope out in the drive-thru. That probably makes Andy cringe the most out in the drive-thru. But
with the African antelope, again, to a certain extent, it goes back to just Illinois weather. Those are obviously ones that we have to bring in when we get to a certain point. That's not necessarily that big of a deal. It's more so, for whatever reason, just with our past experience with antelope in general, they potentially are one of those animals that they do a little better when they have, quote unquote, a little less freedom on hand in terms of, it'd be one thing if we had kind of large enclosures where we could have just that species of antelope and they don't have any other interaction with potential other antelope. Depending on what the ratio is, males, females, antelope, they are somewhat territorial. So, potential fighting with other antelope species that are out in the drive-thru is a possibility for sure. Usually with most antelope, they do have some form of horns on their heads. So it is always a potential injury type of situation. And usually antelope in general are probably one of the more skittish animals that we have here. So from a kind of vet standpoint and then just a overall interaction standpoint, they're a little more tricky than, let's say, a water buffalo or a zebra or something like that, just from their demeanor and kind of always having that instinct of, run before kind of be more intrigued type of mentality. So it just kind of, there's some drawbacks with having antelope out there, but like right now we have elands out there, we have our scimitar, which I would be fine with trying to get another scimitar. That might relieve some of the tensions out there if we brought in a female for the male to kind of join up with. He mentioned we have a male Addix that was kind of the backstory on him. He was a breeder male, so they
used a small pin with females, and they cut his horns off so he couldn't hurt the females.
Yeah, so kind of one of those situations. He definitely he doesn't look the prettiest, but if it wasn't a park like us taking him in, he probably wouldn't really have a future just because of just the way his appearance is. So we kind of went ahead and brought him on board. So we'll kind of see if we can get him as tame and docile as possible. So he might be potentially out in the drive-through come next year in terms of when we let him all out for the spring. But right now we're kind of doing some more one-on-one training with him, and that'll carry into the wintertime since we're so close to the winter months, and then we'll kind of see where we're at springtime. But yeah, it's a running theme around here that I'm the one that always automatically says no to animals coming in, but I'm the
He'll say yes to these kind of animals, the 3D printed statues that don't move, don't have to do back care on.
Their monthly cost is a lot less than some of the other ones. And also, antelope can also be one of the more extremely dangerous animals that we bring in, especially if we get into a situation where it's potentially like a bottle raised type of antelope. Another antelope that we used to have here, we ended up having, the last one we ended up having to locate to another facility because he was just too dangerous for kind of our setup that we have with the drive-through and us being able to go out and interact with the animals out there. It's called the nilgai. So it's Asia's largest antelope species. And this one, we knew going in that it was a bottle baby. It was a male. Horns were trimmed down, so that helped a little bit with kind of our thought process of bringing it here and having it interact with other animals. And for the most part, from an animal to animal standpoint, we didn't have any issues with it at all. But the main issue we had was, I always called him, he was a headhunter out there. So it wouldn't matter if you were 100 yards away from him or 500 yards away from him. If he saw you walking out the drive-through, he would get up, start stalking you, and then eventually charge at you. So extremely dangerous. That was probably the most dangerous the drive-through has been since we've had the wildlife park in terms
From
of
our standpoint.
Yes, from our standpoint, in terms of being able to go out, get an animal to do vet work, bring him in, herding animals, all that stuff, we had to take him into consideration. And then obviously when he was in holding pens, alleyways, we would have more or less, he was one you baited to kind of get him to go where you wanted to go. So you didn't have to necessarily push him too much. He kind of did most of the moving around on his own, and it was just the person that was in front of him had to be real quick on his feet. So that was usually me. But so we had a pair of Ginsbach as well that were extremely kind of aggressive and saw some aggressiveness through kind of common shared fence lines. We were going to introduce them out to the drive-through, but it was just a little too nervous on our part in terms of releasing them out because their horns are a little different than, let's say, the scimitars, or that curve back a little more. They're a little more straight on, so they could do quite a bit of damage if they got into a situation, felt cornered or something like that. So it kind of all depends on, just like with anything else that I've talked about in previous podcasts, all animals have their own unique personality. Some of them respond differently to certain situations as opposed to other ones. So we never quite know what their personalities are until we actually get them here at the park and kind of work with them a little bit. And then ultimately since our drive-through is kind of its own standalone, more or less ecosystem, we have to take that into consideration. So we can't bring something out there that is way more aggressive than anything else that'll disrupt kind of the natural order of things out there, because then we start having other issues with certain animals won't come up to eat because they're kind of afraid of this one particular animal. So that's kind of that's the biggest drawback of when we bring new animals to the park that are purposely going to be going out to the drive-through. There's kind of a check and balance type of system in place where we have to be 100% confident that they will mesh with the other animals out there and not necessarily kind of stir the pot, more or less. So just kind of so happens that antelope are kind of in one of the gray areas where you can easily get 50% of them that don't mesh well and 50% of them do mesh well. So I'm not opposed to antelope, but there needs to be a plan in place.
Because you mentioned the drive-through is kind of its own ecosystem. We're also always aware that the more animals we put out there, the more grass they're consuming, and we want it to stay green out there. So that is one positive about the antelope. Their hooves are smaller. They don't eat as much grass as like if we brought in a lot of big horses or the bigger cattle species or bison, that would make a noticeable difference in the drive-through from a look standpoint, from a lack of grass standpoint. So we do try to be aware of that as well. Big cats are something we've talked about from the very beginning, and so that is something that would be coming eventually. And then we've talked in previous podcasts about kind of switching part of the drive-through around, and that will allow us to expand the parking lot. That's when we'd have the room to do big cats, but then that would also kind of position us. We're still kind of talking through it, but what it would look like to bring giraffe to the park.
And see, like giraffe is almost an easier thing to wrap your head around, bring them to the park, because they won't be ones that'll be kind of just out in the drive-through mingling throughout the year. They will kind of be in their own enclosure. So as long as we do our research right, we can have everything designed specifically for giraffe before we can get them here. So from a personality standpoint, it's not as critical when you're talking about animals that kind of are going to be in their own sort of habitat exhibit, as opposed to going back to kind of any sort of animal that might kind of be out in the drive-through. Like if we would bring in a zebra is probably something down the road that we would eventually bring in another one. And we would have to make sure that the introductions went fine with the two zebras that we already have here. So as opposed to a big cat that would be potentially coming into just one big cat for its enclosure, we don't have to necessarily worry about any sort of introductions taking place or anything. Same would be true for the giraffe. So definitely a higher financial dollar amount from getting their area built and their barn built and everything that's specifically designed for giraffe, but from a, I guess, sleeping better at night standpoint, not necessarily having to worry about what this temperament of this giraffe is, we don't have to worry about that too much. Hopefully with all the animals that we have here, it'll take time, and again, it kind of depends on what that animal is and how quickly you can develop a certain relationship, trust factor with them. But that's kind of the easy thing when it comes to the animal keeper relationship, is that we 100% know that will improve upon the longer that animal is here. So even if an animal is extremely aggressive towards us, for the most part, you can kind of work through that. Kind of the biggest issue with the Neil guy that I was talking about earlier was the fact that he was a drive-through animal. So he was one that was not, didn't have a constant daily type of interaction with the keepers. So it would kind of be hit or miss. And we ended up ultimately having to bring him into one of our holding pens. And it just got to the point where, going back to kind of our motto, if we can't provide a better home for animals, then we had no business keeping them here. We were kind of being like, well, if we can't actually have him enjoy the large open areas out in the drive-through, and he's in kind of still large holding pens, but smaller type of areas, we need to kind of look for a more permanent home for him. So we were able to find a park down in Georgia that was actually looking for a breeding nilgai. So we were able to kind of work with them and kind of better situation all the way around, where they were set up a little different than what we were. And then kind of we didn't have to continue to kind of not only work around him, but kind of confine him to a more isolated type of area. That's not necessarily how we like to do things, if at all possible. So
that kind of covers most of the animals that we've talked about bringing in the future. There's always other potential options or smaller animals or things like that.
Well, it's also one of those things that we could get a phone call tomorrow for some animal that we never even thought of. And if we're able to figure out a way to make it work, then it goes back to we have to always be a little bit of a flexible when it comes to certain situations. And if it works in the long run, then we usually figure out a way to make it so that animal can come here. But there's potentially animals that we haven't even thought of that would have the opportunity to bring in the future, as long as we have the space and resources.
So the next one talks about has there been any pranks. So we laugh a lot here. I don't know kind of what the environment is at a lot of businesses, but I feel like we have a lot of fun here. Sarcasm plays a big role in what we do, so that's probably the bulk of it. But we do, like, we'll try to scare each other at different times, done different things to mess with, like we were talking about earlier. I love to screw with him in regards to telling him we have a new animal coming in when we don't, or that.
My reaction to that is it's usually true when he says that. He might be starting off joking, but that's actually how he leads into letting you know, oh yeah, by the way, this actually is true.
So it's all part of my system, because if it wasn't believable, he wouldn't fall for it. So you have to do it every once in a while, so then he knows that you could potentially be serious. But he found a guy on Facebook who makes movie props, and so he made an American alligator for us and an alligator snapping turtle for us. So it's made out of foam, and we've placed that alligator out among the walkthrough, just kind of see people's reactions when they see it, because it looks real, it looks legit, and that has gotten people to react and respond.
Yep.
And we had probably the biggest one. We had an intern that she was doing a study trip over in Africa. While she was over there is when we got this alligator, and so the team was taking pictures of us with it, sending them to her. She believed we had a real alligator, kept taking pictures. When she came back, she came here early that day, walked through the entire park, and didn't find the alligator. We had actually set it inside our reptile room on the floor, thinking she would walk in there and would scare her. What we weren't thinking about was it was a Tuesday, and that's when one of our retired guy locally comes out and volunteers. He came in before her. He opened the door and turned the reptile room light on. He almost had a heart attack.
Yeah.
And then he moved it out of there, so when she went in, it wasn't even there. So we scared him unintentionally. We didn't scare her, but she was pretty fired up when she realized it was fake.
Yeah.
But even one of our team members, some of her friends still think she is a modern day Crocodile Dundee. They still think it's real, that the pictures of her being on top holding the mouth closed are real. So we have a lot of things we can do with both of those pieces. But our management meetings, again, usually there's a lot of laughing during those. We kind of like to poke fun at each other. And again, sarcasm plays a big part in our daily routine, for sure.
Well, it would have been a couple of years ago, but one of Daniel, the Amish guy that works for us, that's kind of our adopted brother, one of his sons, it was my birthday, thought it'd be a good idea to give me a birthday present. So I was like, oh, that's real nice and stuff. So I Go to open it up and come to find out he filled up a box full of manure. He thought that was the funniest thing ever in terms of when I opened that up. And so we had to clean a lot of stalls for the rest of that day for sure. But so kind of just little things like that here and there.
Yeah. But we just always try to have a good time with what we do. So kind of the animal spotlight for this week is Jax. Jax is our green-winged macaw. He came to us from a family who thought it'd be cool to have a big parrot as a pet, and then found out that it is not cool. So, like, he's huge. His claws can easily scratch your skin. His beak, I mean, he can break walnuts open with his beak. So his beak could do damage if he were ever to bite you. And so they had...
Not only that, but they live. I mean, it is
they're probably
time commitment for sure.
60 to 80 years probably is their lifespan. So, but they had him in a relatively small cage due to his size and not a whole lot of enrichment inside that cage. So a habit that parrots, especially macaws, can get into is plucking. So they'll pluck feathers out of their chest. And so, like, his chest was more of the gray down feathers look. The red feathers have been gone. So that's a bad habit to break. And so we spent a lot of time working with him, doing things. And so he's gotten to a point now where he probably looks better now than he has in a very long time.
Yeah.
He will step up for us. I think he definitely favors guys more than girls, but then Penelope, our blue and yellow macaw, definitely favors girls more than guys.
Goes back to the personality, individual personality.
Yeah. And so he has an indoor area inside the gift shop that people can see when they come in. And so the question is, why does he hang from his window? So he has two big viewing windows. It's metal on the inside. There's jade trim that trims out around those windows. So he will use his claws and hang from that jade trim. So it looks like he's hanging in the window. Sometimes he'll hang upside down, open his wings up, kind of looks like a bat. But he'll also slide down the jade trim on the side. So it looks like he's sliding out a fireman's pole. So
So a lot of that corresponds when, like on days that we're open and there's a lot of interaction with people coming through, seeing him. I mean, he loves, macaws are social animals, so I mean, they do love kind of interaction. And then if you get the right type of person that kind of feeds his entertainment type of personality that he has, then there are times that he does put on quite a bit of show. So in terms of him hanging down upside down and then flapping his wings, there's usually at least one or two people around before he would do that. So he kind of likes to be the center of attention to a certain extent.
Yeah. And like he has an outside place, so go outside. There's no roof or anything. It's just different logs he can climb around on, and he stays there. I feel like he is either too lazy to fly or he's afraid to fly. Because if he gets down on the ground, he'll just start squawking until we come and pick him back up. But so Jax can talk. He can whistle. He can mimic people's laugh. And then one of the creepier things our team found out is he can also whisper. So when we found that out the first time, that really creeped out one of our girls. She was in the gift shop by herself. She heard whispering. She thought somebody was screwing with her, somebody playing a prank on her. And it was Jax.
Well, that was going to be, kind of ties into the funny story. So with me and him living on site, to say that we do certain things on off hours would be an understatement. So there's been times where I've been in the gift shop dead of night, so kind of pitch black in there, doing something, and then all of a sudden he will start doing his little whisper, creepy voice to you. So even though I 100% know that it's Jax, it still doesn't change the fact that it pretty much gets me every time to where at least have to look over my shoulder to make sure that it's Jack's making a noise and not some creep that's inside the gift shop or something like that. So,
One thing that a lot of people don't think about when we get asked to take macaws, I have to ask the question, what is their language like? Because they're very smart. They learn their language from us. And so like we have had to say no to macaws in the past because they swear or they cuss, and we kind of promote ourselves as a family-friendly place, family-friendly atmosphere, and so we can't really have a bird saying words
don't really have
like that.
21 and over type of section where we can put our.
Yeah. So I think it must have been one of our interns that taught him. He will say red rum occasionally. But thankfully that's the most extreme his language is. So we do.
Well, from a language standpoint, he is still, I would say, a little shyer than other macaws that we've seen, to where if he's in the right personality or in the right mood and stuff, then he'll start really talking away. But there are times he's kind of a catch-22. He likes attention and he wants to have big crowds, especially when he's outside having big crowds around him. But it almost seems like when he has so many eyes on him, he'll kind of get a little shy and he won't necessarily talk away like he did to gather the crowd there to begin with. So
he does love to dance.
Yeah,
Bobs his head, rocks back and forth. And I think he's probably about 10 years old now. So I think we thought he was about five or six when he first came to us. But that is one thing that we've seen when an animal comes from individuals or a family and they got that animal, they don't really have exact ages or birth dates or anything like that. And so it's very possible that they got him from somebody who told him that he's a year old. In reality, he could have been 10 years old at that point in time. And so we do our best with the information we're given. So we think he's about 10 years old, but sometimes when we're given animals, we don't always know for sure.
Yeah.
But no, so that kind of wraps Jack's up. So with that, we appreciate you guys tuning in again and look forward to seeing you next time.
Later.